Welcome to The Kicker. I'm your host, Megan Greenwell. And today's episode is a special one for me. My guest is Sofia Barnett, who's not only a great journalist, but also somebody that I've known since she was a junior in high school. She's now a reporter at the Minnesota Star Tribune, where she's covered everything from a school shooting at a Catholic school there to the ICE raids that became the biggest story in the country. And she did this all within her first 9 months in the professional world. So I'm super excited to have her, and I think it's a great conversation. Sofia Barnett, welcome to The Kicker.
Thanks.
First of all, can you tell us what you do for a living, where you're based, what you cover, all of those things?
Yes, so I'm a journalist in Minneapolis. I work for the Minnesota Star Tribune. I've been covering immigration for about 4 months. Before that, I was on the public safety team, so I was doing like crime in courts and whatnot.
And how long have you been at the Star Tribune?
I started June of 2025. I graduated college May of 2025, and then I went to the Star Tribune.
Amazing. And we've known each other since long before that.
Many moons ago.
Can you talk a little bit about how we know each other?
So 7 years ago, maybe, I did a program called the Princeton Summer Journalism Program, and Megan is highly and hugely involved in that. And it's for low-income students who are aspiring to be journalists or just generally interested in learning more about journalism. And it's also a college access program, so you get college admissions counseling, which was very helpful and consequential for me because I went to Brown and was the first person in my family to go to college. So, yeah, that was very important and gave me some friends like you.
And I've done that program for a long time,
yes,
as you know, and you've now been at varying levels involved in that program for a long time. And so I've worked with like hundreds of students
a lot
through that program now, all of whom are like brilliant, go on to do great things, all of whom are very talented at journalism. But different students come into that program with different levels of commitment to journalism.
Yeah.
Some I would describe as sort of journalism curious.
Right.
A few are sort of like I was in high school, where it's like, I'm going to do this no matter what. You, I would say, are at the very top of that list of people who were like, oh, I'm going to be a journalist. Like, your intensity was both inspiring and a little terrifying.
Off-putting, yeah.
And so tell me about what you remember from that time about your relationship with journalism and what you were hoping to do in journalism.
Yeah, so I think I did go into the program very focused on journalism, but I was also at a point in my life where I was acutely aware of my income status. And so I went in, I was not journalism curious, I was journalism committed, but I was also kind of dabbling, or I guess just sort of mulling over the idea of potentially going to law school because I thought that it would be a smarter financial decision for me in the long run. I thought journalists don't make a lot of money. I don't come from a position of money. It would probably be helpful if I did something that could actually, pull me up above my station or whatever, if you want to talk like you're Alexander Hamilton or something. But I think I ultimately just decided that I would rather do something that's directly related to public service. And I don't know, I was always really interested in writing. I was really bad at math. And so I think that made me even more compelled to channel all of my energy into humanities. And so I did that. And I took a journalism class my freshman year of high school when I was 14 and romanticized the living heck out of it. Mm-hmm. And then was hit with the reality. But then, it's like a marriage. I guess I'm not married. But I think that the cost-benefit analysis, it's worth it for me in the long run.
And I remember talking to you like you were in high school. You were about to go off to college. So you weren't going to have to be looking for a job for many years after that. But you were very concerned about the job market in a way that like I related to because I don't come from money either. Mm-hmm. But also, I'm enough older than you that I graduated college into a different journalism landscape than you. And so I feel like there was some element of like me saying like, look, I'm making a living in journalism. Mm-hmm. I've always supported myself this way. And you may be sort of feeling a little skeptical, like, yes, I understand, but like you did that earlier.
Totally.
Does that feel accurate?
Yes, entirely. I feel like the landscape is just really disheartening. And I think also even recently, I mean, I'm lucky that I have a job. I'm lucky I had a full-time job. Honestly, I was at the Star Tribune as an intern. That's how I started. That's how I got my foot in the door there, and then was lucky enough to be hired full-time. But I applied to a lot of jobs, and I mean, I got some interviews, but I got rejected from all of them but one. I mean, maybe I applied to, like, let's say 9, so I could have probably broadened my a wider net, you could say. But I think it's just, and then also with the Washington Post laying off everyone, pretty much, I think that was really crazy. And as somebody who's interested in potentially going abroad, seeing like the entire foreign desk just be axed was insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so even back then, you were very interested in international work, very interested in, working for big publications. Tell me about, like, in your best case scenario at that time, like, what your dream job in journalism was.
Oh, I had such a skewed perception of everything. And I think, like, I, as somebody who didn't really have strong professional role models growing up, was kind of really attracted to just, like, the idea of prestige. And as somebody who, again, did not come from a family that had money, came from a very untraditional, unconventional background, I was kind of like, wow, this is super attractive. I'm quite literally pulling myself up by the bootstraps. And so I got into Brown, and that was life-changing for me. And then I think the environment at Brown was not one that was super focused on journalism. It was obviously very focused on the humanities, and there was a lot of room to explore that, but it was not serious when it came to like nonfiction or journalism and that. I don't know. I think like ultimately I was attracted to the prestige and thought that it would be realistic for me to go from my Ivy League university to like an Ivy League newspaper, if that exists. And that was ridiculous. I think like I really did not have the understanding that you have to build a career. Like you really have to build like the blocks, you place them. You have to actually do the work. You have to serve your time. Like you have to do the silly like press release write-ups. You have to do like, you have to go down to court, and when people are busy, like you have to do the things that other people don't want to do, and that's fine. And you also get to do really great things. And it's all of these things together that you're stacking up on top of each other that get you to the places that you want to be. And I just had no understanding of that at all. And I think also because I saw programs like, for example, like the Times Fellowship, I was kind of like, oh, so there are direct pipelines into prestigious journalism institutions. But I think now more so than maybe 5 years ago, I've noticed that even those fellowship programs are becoming increasingly populated with like 3 years of professional experience journalists. You know, it's kind of like this weird, like you graduate college, you have 3 years basically to like build your blocks, and then you'll sort of see where you go after those 3 years. You can stay where you're at. You can make a move. But I don't know. I think it was just really, really unreasonable for me to just be focused on the papers that people knew. And like I never had been to the Midwest. I'd never been to Minnesota. I landed in Minnesota, went there for the first time when I moved for my internship. And I never thought I would end up at that paper. And it's a kick-ass paper, if I'm allowed to say that.
You could say that. You started building those blocks in college. You did 2 professional internships?
Yes. So I worked at the Dallas Morning News, and I was also freelancing for the Boston Globe for about a year and some change. I also freelanced for the Providence Journal. I was really big on freelancing.
But you interned here too, in New York?
I like to not include that one, but the New York Post, I did intern there. That happened. I learned a lot about what I don't want in a workplace environment from that job. It was really no comment.
No, but that's what I want to hear about in as much or as little detail is like what you took out of those newspaper internships that sort of informed what you wanted to do career-wise.
Well, I think if you're in a newsroom where editors are yelling at you, it's probably not where you want to be. I think there are standards of professional conduct that are important to follow, and I think when you don't follow those standards of professional conduct, people can't do their best work. And that was absolutely my experience at the New York Post. And even just like the rhetoric that editors would use, like the way people spoke to each other was just deeply uncomfortable and unusual to me. And I mean, honestly, I found myself sort of, I will say I applied to that internship very, very late. This is something that I wish I'd known maybe my freshman and sophomore year of college is, I mean, journalism internships, you got to apply in like fall for a job that you want in June. So it's like almost a year out, you're trying to figure out what you're going to be doing. And I was hugely unprepared for that. And so I was quite late my sophomore year trying to figure out what I would do that summer. And so I just looked up newspaper internships. I didn't use Indeed. I didn't use LinkedIn. I didn't use Handshake. I totally just went online on Google and was like, journalism internships. And the New York Post popped up, and I saw that it was $22 an hour. I was like, that's hugely attractive to me. And I was like, New York, that's awesome. I want to live there. I thought I'd give it a shot. I didn't really know a whole lot about the New York Post other than that they do like some tabloid stuff. They report on celebrities, whatever. I was not completely aware of the conspiratorial propaganda that occasionally comes out of that publication. But I got the job. I was a Sunday news intern. That's what my official position was. So most of my stories were in the Sunday paper, which back in the day, in the print days, is actually important.
Like 3 years ago?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think like one of the craziest things that's happened to me in journalism is a story from the New York Post, and I think it was 2023 when the Canadian wildfire smog was everywhere in New York City, and it just like covered the city's skyline in orange and gray, and it was just ridiculous. It looked apocalyptic. It was straight out of a horror movie outside, and it was maybe my first week at the New York Post, and I sent an email to my editor, and mind you, an email, not a conversation, an email to my editor, and was like, should we be covering how people who are living on the streets are faring with this? Like, I mean, people who can't get away from the smog and maybe are suffering from some sort of respiratory problems, whatever it might be. And so vividly, I remember he said, the New York Post doesn't care about homeless people, period. You should call up the Bronx Zoo and see if any of the monkeys have a cough.
Oh, I remember this story.
Yeah. So that would never happen at the Star Tribune. That would never be, I mean, it's just the politics bled so much into the way that stories were decided on, the way stories were assigned. So that was a highly unique experience.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't, that was comical. It was ridiculous. I had a stakeout outside of Cynthia Nixon's apartment because she wasn't paying for like fire alarms that were constantly going off in her building. Like it was just ridiculous stuff. And then I was at the Dallas Morning News and I was reporting on like abortion.
Okay, wait, hold on. I want to back up there because
Okay.
So you did that post-internship the summer after your sophomore year.
Yes, the summer after freshman year was an internship with the Princeton program that we met at.
Yes. So then you go back to school junior year, and I remember
Yes.
you being very, like, I'm on top of it, I'm applying in the fall,
Yes.
all of that. But you
Yes.
were very fixated on coming back to New York.
Highly.
And I want to talk a little bit about that because that feels like a very common young journalist thing to me where you're like, well, I have to kind of make the big time, and the big time is in New York.
Right.
And so I need to go to New York.
Right.
And you and I talked a lot about this.
And you really
I
are the
kept
reason.
trying to say, go to local, go to local,
Right,
go to local.
yes.
I'm always telling young journalists to do this, and nobody ever wants to listen to me. So tell me how you ended up at the Dallas Morning News. You're
Yeah.
from that area.
My hometown paper.
and
Yes.
and what that experience was like.
Yeah, well, I think I definitely learned my lesson after interning for the New York Post and was like, I am not doing the work that I want to do here. And I think something that you really helped me realize when I was like 18 was that it's not where you work, it's the stories that you're able to produce where you work. And so I think I was attracted to the fact that the New York Post is like the third most read news publication in our country. And that was something that seemed appealing to me because of what you said. Exactly. I thought that I needed to go to New York. I thought that this is the place where it all happens. And I think like you sort of have this very like stark visual imagery of like the New York Times building, or like even just the fact that the Columbia Journalism School is here and the Pulitzers happen here, things like that. That's very publicly, like you can see that. And so I feel like that contributes to a lot of those feelings of, and I think also just general East Coast elitism is probably at play in this. But yeah, so I ended up at the Dallas Morning News because I started getting serious about finding a paper that would allow me to report on the things that I wanted to report on. And I was interested at the time in like women's health. And I knew that Texas obviously had still does, very strict abortion ban. And I am from the Dallas area. I grew up with the Dallas Morning News sort of around me. We did not have a subscription, unfortunately, but I was exposed to it constantly. And I figured that I would have a little bit of hometown advantage. And it's a great newspaper. They do amazing work. There are journalists there who I really look up to, and I learned so much from my time there. And I was like, I feel like I could report on abortion here, and that was something that was really interesting to me. And I would not, I mean, obviously abortions happen everywhere, but just the law it makes it so different in the South. And so that was sort of where I was originally kind of thinking I would start out my journalism career, was in the South, because I was like, frankly, the politics are so they have very obvious and visible impacts on people in a way that I'm not sure we always see on the East Coast. Or maybe you do see it, but it's just less obvious.
How did you sort of vet during an intern application process that you would be able to report on the stuff that you care about? Because I think a lot of interns are like, I just have to take what I can get, right?
Yeah, I wish I had something more helpful to say about this, because I really do think it was a personality thing for me. I think like I came into the Dallas Morning News with stories already sketched out. And I was like, I found this girl. This is her experience with an at-home abortion. It went super wrong. She's willing to talk. Can I do this?
How did you find that?
Friend of a friend, and was sort of like, oh, like, this is a terrible experience. Like, what would you do? And I'm like, actually, I can't help counsel you on this, but I would write about it. And also Dallas area, or wider DFW area. And I think, like, ultimately they were kind of, the Dallas Morning News was kind of like, this feels really ambitious. I'm not sure you can pull it off. And also at the same time, the newsroom was working on a broader project about abortion, because this was like a year post-obs, I think. And I just did it. I did the reporting. I spent so many hours, like over 150 hours, honestly. That I spent most of my summer, like, because it's really difficult to find someone in Texas to talk about their illegal abortion experience on the record with their name. And I was able to find some people to talk to, and I reached out to maybe 300 people, groups, mutual aid, legal aid, women's health people, OBGYNs, just huge range of people, and it took a very long time. But I was convinced that story was like my magnum opus and would be like so powerful once it came out, because the stories of these people were just so hard to hear and listen to. And ultimately I finished the story and put it in front of the managing editor and was like, I did this. Like, let me know what you think. And she was like, awesome, cool. I was like, great. So I think like I don't know, I've seen a lot of my peers come into internships sort of reserved and quiet, and I think it's really challenging, but I think if you have an idea, you really have to be a self-advocate, because you are the youngest person in the room. And I think it's easier to say no without having a copy of what you're saying no to in front of you, you know? So if you have the time to go around and do whatever reporting you want to do while also doing what you're supposed to be doing, like, why not do that and then just see what happens? So I think that was my approach.
The Dallas Morning News also had like a pretty strong, there was like a group of interns, like a sizable
I
group.
think there were like 15.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, there was like two Metro interns. There was a data intern, features intern. Then there was like product or whatever, the back techie things that I know nothing about.
And that's how like every newspaper internship was when I was doing newspaper internships. But now that feels kind of rare. And it seems like having that community was meaningful to you.
It was.
In your first like real newspaper that's not the New York Post kind of internship. Like, tell me about what that meant.
Yeah, I mean, when I worked at the New York Post, I was not friends with any of my coworkers at all. And when I was at the Dallas Morning News, I was friends with all of my coworkers, and it was awesome. I think because we were all coming into it from the same position and at the same time and in the same age, it was easy for us to all connect with each other. But, I mean, some of us aren't even doing journalism anymore. And I'm like, that was 2 years ago, and you already are throwing in the towel. Like, and I understand. I mean, like, it is so brutal out there. Some of the most talented ambitious young journalists I know are unemployed, or they're freelancing like on the side while doing something else. Like maybe they're working at a bookstore, they're a barista, and they're like maybe trying to get stories in different magazines, things like that, or they have a part-time gig. And that's still journalism work, but it's not a full-time job. And it's crazy how many people are highly qualified, young, and unemployed. And even, I mean, personally, I've mentioned this to you that I do think it would be really interesting to do reporting abroad, and I've looked around just for fun, really, just to see what opportunities exist out there. And the jobs that are posted require like 10 years of experience, and they want you to have already gone abroad. So I'm like, how do you get abroad if you're supposed to have already been abroad to get this job? Like, what's not clicking for me? I don't know. It's really discouraging sometimes. I'm very, very lucky, and I'm very aware of it.
Even so, you finish that internship, you go back to Brown for senior year, and I feel like even then you were still like, maybe I'll go to law school, maybe I'll do a PhD program.
Yeah, I was considering PhD. I sort of bailed on the law school thing my sophomore year because I was kind of like, honestly, if I want to pursue journalism in full force, which I did, I was like, I can't afford to be splitting my time in the way that I was. And I was also, I don't know if you remember, but I was freelancing in college, so I did some stuff for Wired. I did some stuff for the Daily Beast. I did some stuff for Teen Vogue. I was just really trying to do everything that I can and go full speed because I recognized that there was it's scarce. I mean, the industry is scarce. There's very little out there for entry-level journalists. So I wanted to make myself seem like I wasn't super entry level, even though I was am honestly.
So to what extent were you considering academia at that point because you were genuinely interested in academia versus you were a little bit trying to hedge your bets because you were still worried journalism might not work out?
So I think, honestly, the academia thing was just this escapist fantasy that I had because ultimately academia is also very hard to get a job in. So I was kind of like, wow, how romantic would it be to just travel the world and read and write and just talk to young, motivated students all day? That just sounds wonderful. But I think, like, realistically, that would be something I would consider down the line if I ever retired from being a journalist.
So tell me about how you ended up at the Minnesota Star Tribune.
Yeah, so I almost didn't apply to this internship because the cover letter is crazy. At least it was in my year, they asked us to select a story from the site and critique it and say what we would have done differently. And so I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. Why would I do this when I get to just reuse my cover letters for all of these other papers and change like 2 sentences, right? And I was just doing that and then tailoring it slightly to the things that I liked about that publication. But to completely write an essay deconstructing a professional piece of reporting kind of just felt a little bit like a test. I had a really awesome interview. I loved the woman who hired me. We connected right away, and it was 15-minute phone interview in, I think, like November. And then I was they gave me an offer by Thanksgiving. And honestly, they were not the only people who offered me an internship. They were the first. And so I'm not sure what advice I would give myself now, looking back, because I don't think as a rule of thumb it's always the best idea to accept just the first job that gets back to you. I think ultimately the Star Tribune was a risk I was willing to take because it is a well-established regional newspaper, and that was what I was looking for. So it was worth it to me. But I mean, like, I really, at that point in my time, wanted to be, again, like we talked about, on the East Coast. And then the Boston Globe, my former employer, offered me an internship like a month later, and I was like, totally screwed that one up. But it turns out I didn't because Minneapolis is great, surprisingly. I was an intern from June to actually January. I got extended in August to stay on the team. My first day on the job was when Melissa Hortman, the Minnesota Speaker of the House, was assassinated. So that was really crazy. My first story was about that. I immediately, because I started interning for the public safety team, was following that like crazy, doing door knocks, just trying to track down people who knew Vance Belter, the assassin. And I mean, there was a manhunt for days. It was just really dramatic. And it was my first, I walked in, no onboarding, no nothing, no hello. And that was okay. I mean, everyone was so busy. I feel like I didn't need onboarding after watching the newsroom come together in that moment. And I felt like I really got the opportunity to see what they could do, to see what this paper was capable of, and they've just blown me away ever since. Like, and then in August, there was the Annunciation school shooting, where 2 children, 8 and 10, were killed, and several others. I don't know the number exactly. It was anywhere from like 7 to 9 were injured, and I was the first reporter on the scene when that happened from any publication. I just like was the first person there, and that was really crazy. And there were just parents running around trying to see if their kids were alive, like screaming, wailing, crying on the ground, just total chaos. And that was the most challenging story that I've reported on. And I think I got to interview an 8-year-old boy who was in the church, and he had some medical issues and was paralyzed from the neck down and was in a wheelchair, and his teacher threw him under a pew and like laid on top of him, and his parents agreed to allow me to come into their home and speak with him, and it was just a really insane thing to see a child try to articulate something that they don't have the vocabulary for, and just like see the physical response. I think like with adults, you maybe hear deflection, or you maybe hear like them not being able to put it into words, but maybe it's less physical, it's less like involuntary. But with a child, it was just very. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that before, because that's the youngest person I've ever interviewed. Like, you're 8. Why would I be interviewing you? And those were obviously the conditions in which I was interviewing him, but that was a very difficult story that taught me a lot. And we followed that. I mean, we're still reporting on the aftermath of that. I mean, and we're also, in the aftermath of a huge immigration explosion in Minneapolis, which has also been very career defining, even though I've had a career for 9 months.
Yeah. So part of what's really interesting to me is this has been maybe the newsiest year in the history of Minneapolis. You just happened to be there in the craziest year. But you didn't go to the Star Tribune to cover any of this. Talk a little bit about what you thought you were going to be covering, because, part of the reason I was excited for you to get that job was they were really interested in your background.
Yes.
And so I want to hear a little bit about that and what you thought you were going to be covering before everything blew up.
Yeah. So I originally was attracted to just the idea of reporting in Minnesota because I know that they have a really high Indigenous population. And so in my conversations with the woman who hired me, I said that I was really excited about the idea of contributing more Indigenous perspectives to the paper because there is one other Native American reporter. So that was something that I was really leaning into. And I did do during the summer before the Annunciation shooting happened and after the assassination happened, I did report on Indigenous child welfare and Native kids in foster care, and that was really impactful for me as well. But I was really leaning into that, and that was something that I thought the Star Tribune was perfect for because it is one of the states with like the highest population of Native people, and that was what I thought it was going to be like. And then I was on the public safety team. Then when I got hired full time, the exact title of my job is technically regional reporter. So that means that theoretically I was in charge of covering the West Metro area of Minnesota. So like there's like 7 suburbs. These won't mean anything to you, but like Chanhassen, Edina, like very wealthy suburbs in Minnesota. And frankly, I was super bummed about that. I was like, the burbs, come on. And I remember when I first started covering the burbs, I wrote this ridiculous story about pet goldfish overrunning a pond in Edina, and the city caught the goldfish and then transported them to the Minnesota Zoo and fed them to bears. And that was my suburb.
That's such a good story, though.
I was on the Star Tribune podcast to talk about that story, actually.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and that was sort of but do you see the difference, obviously,
Yes.
the stark difference between covering a school shooting and covering an assassination and covering 2 lethal ICE-related shootings and then reporting on goldfish. Like, they're very different.
Sure.
And I think, like, I've always known that I am somebody who, like, thrives in intense environments and works best under pressure, I mean, for better or for worse. And I think, like, the idea of transitioning to a quieter beat was not really appealing to me, but ultimately was the right move because it allows me to be pulled into anything else for what the Star Tribune needs now, which is now I'm no longer a suburbs reporter. I will now be covering federal courts.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So there you go.
Wow, breaking news on the CJR podcast. I love this.
Yeah, embargoed.
So yeah, this is always interesting to me because I feel like when young reporters go to a place with a sizable staff, right, you get thrown out to cover the suburbs.
Right.
This was the same as my first job.
Right.
I was at the Washington Post, but I was covering Southern Maryland, which is like 3 counties out.
Sure.
And like in a very tiny bureau covering like the least newsy counties in the area. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a real sink or swim thing with young reporters where either you like keep your head down and you're like, well, these big stories don't apply to me because I covered this area and the story isn't happening in this area. Mm. Or you're the person who's like, there's a school shooting. I don't care that it's not happening in my area. I'm going
go
right now.
Right.
So like
that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. I want to hear about like how you knew to do that and like on a almost nuts and bolts level, like how you did that.
Yeah.
When the newsroom is like scrambling, trying to figure out how to cover something.
Yeah. Well, someone on my team was like, there were just gunshots in my backyard. And so I immediately left. I was like, where do you live? And he was like, this is where I live. And it's like, it sounds like it's coming from the Catholic school. And I was like, oh.
And you just went.
I just went. And then I would not recommend this totally. However, on my way, I was messaging my editor. I have a very close relationship with her. She has always seen something in me that makes her feel comfortable with me inserting myself into these stories. And I said, hey, I think I'm going to go check this out. I'm on the way, whatever. She's like, cool, I'm sending Louis. He'll be there out like 10 minutes after you, whatever. Louis was one of my colleagues. And so I went there and I mean, there were cops everywhere. They were just starting to like block off the perimeter with like caution tape because they didn't want like people running. And then they had parents like trying to go to a reunification site, it seemed. So I guess I got there maybe like 15 minutes, 12 minutes after the first shots were fired. And at that point, I had parents asking me, like, do you know if the shooter is dead? Do you know where the shooter is? Have they contained him? And I'm like, I don't know. And some parent was like, how do you not know? You are a journalist. Wow. I was like, I am not a cop. I'm trying to figure out the same information that you are. I wish I could tell you. I really do. I wish I could help you. I can't. And I mean, just a very emotionally volatile situation. Everyone is just experiencing the most unfathomable thing of their lives. And I don't know, I was really in this position of, God, like, I want to talk to these people, but also I want them to respond to their children first. And ultimately, I decided to only talk to parents who were coming out of the reunification center, not people, which was at the gym in the basement of the church or the school. And I didn't approach, obviously, any of the parents who were, like, running into the, like, reunification area or, like, wailing and collapsing on the sidewalk. Like, that was – so you just have to use your – you have to be a human. You have to use your best judgment. I mean, obviously, you would not want to – I wouldn't want to talk to – frankly, I wouldn't want to talk to a reporter at all, even if I'm leaving the reunification center. That's something I think about a lot, too, is, like, I feel like this job can be really exploitative and vulture-y and uncomfortable in ways that I am not totally used to. And I think in those moments it's really important to be a person. And I really, really, really try to be a person. But it's crazy to try and approach someone in that moment, right? I mean, like, what would you do?
I mean, I've done it too because I covered the Virginia Tech shooting.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Which I was the same age as you are now.
Right.
And it was also like that wasn't my area, but we all got thrown into covering it. And I was like calling, the friends of these kids from Virginia Tech saying like, hey, so I know your friend just died. Will you talk to me? And, the thing I learned, which like everybody always says, but I think you have to sort of experience it, is like when somebody who's really close to you dies, a lot of people really want to talk about their friend, right? Or their family member or whatever. Not everybody, but it did start to feel to me like I was offering people an opportunity to spread the story of their loved one.
Yeah,
But
I think I
also
felt similarly. Like I covered like one of the 10-year-old girl who died. I covered her celebration of life.
Yep.
And that was, I mean, everyone wanted to talk about
Yep.
her. I mean, she was described as a badass. I'm like, she's 10 years old and she's a badass?
Yeah.
Like, crazy. And it was just, I mean, people, I think that moment also was created with the intention of talking about her, right? Like a celebration of life is very intentional.
Right.
An active school shooting scene is not intentional.
Yes.
So I think like,
right, it's
totally
waiting
different
for the
vibe.
moment.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So then that shooting happens.
Yes.
It's a horrible tragedy.
Yes.
And anybody reasonable in that moment is going to assume this is going to be the biggest news story in Minneapolis of the year, right?
right. And I did. And I
Right.
really did think that. And then when I went back to visit campus, Brown, because I still have a lot of close professors and friends there, they were all like, wow, like, that's awful. That's so crazy. Are you okay? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think I'm okay. It's kind of, I'm still registering it, but, you know, it's just part of the job, whatever. And then 6 months later, it's like, actually, it can get even more intense.
So ICE comes to town.
Yes.
I assume on that story it was kind of everybody covering some aspect of it.
Think. So I was assigned to be a part of the immigration team in late October because there's, to be clear, ICE was in Minnesota before the surge. I feel like people have this misconception where all of a sudden there were like 3,000 federal agents in Minneapolis. And it's true that all of a sudden there were thousands, but like previously there were maybe 200, which is still a lot. I mean, but obviously nowhere comparable to what we've seen in the recent months. And so I had covered a couple of ICE raids. I went to some confrontations. I was gassed a couple times. Then they gave us equipment so I wouldn't get gassed anymore. And it really escalated, obviously, with Operation Metro Surge, which the technical start date is December 4th. And that was when thousands more agents came into Minneapolis. We were trying to confirm this before the official launch date, which was December 4th. We were like, we heard from people in the U.S. Attorney's Office who were kind of whispering about it, and we were trying to confirm it on the record, and nobody wanted to say anything, obviously. It was very difficult to get any sort of confirmation, and then it was just like all of a sudden, we see them. We know they're here. And then there were all these statements from DHS and Kristi Noem, and she started to come to Minneapolis a lot, and so did Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino, who was then ousted from Minneapolis, as was, well, Kristi Noem was also ousted, as we have seen. And I think that was a team of the initial, it was called the ICE pop-up team, and it was initially maybe 5 people. It was myself, our other federal courts reporter who I am working with now, another public safety reporter, and someone whose job was specifically immigration reporter. Like that was their full time. Like they had been doing that for a year. And then the investigative reporter. So that was the team.
So how do you make that team? I mean, all of those people like
Makes
have
sense.
been doing this, right? You're the 22-year-old fresh out of college.
Right.
Like, how do you make that team?
I think I made it very clear from the start when I was at the Star Tribune. I made a point to get coffee, to get lunch, to meet all of the editors and all of the managers and tell them what I was interested in from the start. So that team was led by the investigative editor, and he is somewhat of a mentor at the Star Tribune for me. And we had coffee together several times, and I told him I was really interested in this. And I actually was kind of, for a moment before Operation Metro Surge, vying for the immigration beat reporter job, because the person covering it was kind of expressing interest in going back to covering Hennepin County courts. And so I was like, well, if you want to go back to your old job, I would love to take your current job. And so that was something that I was interested in before the crackdown officially started. And I think he was just aware of my interest and thought that it would be, I mean, it couldn't hurt to have me on the team. And then I think I quickly became somewhat of a first responder, not in like the sense of like first responder, but as in like the first to respond. And I don't know, I think like something that I just wish that a lot of young journalists knew is that like you can sort of put yourself in the rooms that you want to be in. If you don't have the conversations and express your interest, no one's going to know what you want to do. And if you're comfortable saying, let's grab coffee, let me swing by your office for 5 minutes, I want to say hello, I want to get to know you, I'm new here, I'm trying to figure out the office, whatever. People are usually willing to talk to you, and they're usually actually impressed that you reached out, which is kind of hilarious because I'm like, our job is to contact people. But generally they're like, wow, so ambitious of you to want to talk to an adult like me. And I've always found those conversations to be really helpful. Even if it's not professionally helpful, it gives you a better sense of the office politics and who you're working with and just sort of the general dynamic and where you fit in. So, yeah, I think that's kind of how it all came to be.
It's all a lot.
It is quite a lot.
How have you been taking care of yourself during all of this?
I don't know. I think I journal. I journal every day. I write in a journal physically with a pen. And I like to make myself do that every day as part of a routine, even if the thing that I add in my journal that day is I don't feel like journaling today. Just so I'm constantly checking in with myself and can kind of track where I am emotionally. I think like there's a lot of necessary desensitization in this industry. And I remember after the first fatal ICE shooting, the killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis, I reported on that. I was on the scene right as her body was being taken away and contributed reporting to a reconstruction of the exact timeline of events and video footage and reviewing video footage to say what exactly happened. We're trying to determine, did she actually turn her car to try and hit an ICE agent? Was she trying to leave the block? Was she trying to lead a protest? What was she trying to do? What happened? And I saw her get shot in the face like probably 50 times from totally different angles, different like closeness, HD, not HD, just all of that. And I think that's strange. Honestly, I think that's not normal. I think it's very weird to watch someone die multiple times, and I think it's a part of the job, and I'm glad to be contributing to something that is obviously important, and setting the record straight in that moment was very, very important because of the conflicting statements we were receiving from federal officials. But it was hard, and I think, I don't know, I sometimes run. I'm really guilty of saying that I have these coping mechanisms and then like completely abandoning them because they're actually challenging. But running's useful for me because I don't like it. And so when I'm doing it, the only thing I can think about is how much I hate it. And so it's really meditative in a way because I'm just totally distracted from everything else in my life.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. But I think that's probably it. Ultimately, I think like I do have a bit of an untraditional background, so I am sort of, I think I have maybe tougher skin than a lot of other people my age might. But it's just become to me like a thing that I have to do for my career, you know, is just constantly see these horrible events just right in front of you and to then inform people about them. And I mean, obviously we have to do a lot of sanitization. Like I would not describe the murder in the gruesome terms in which it, like the breakfast test, right? Like if you have the newspaper in the morning and you're eating eggs, you don't want to see like description of someone's like brain matter, right? And so I don't know, it's hard to take care of yourself as a journalist, but I feel like a lot of it is just avoidance, and hopefully someone can find a solution for that. It's not going to be me, but if you find out, let me know.
I don't know how to ask this question without it just being like, please tell me how right I was, but I'm just going to ask the question. This is sort of the reason I always want young journalists to go work in local, right? Because you could have gone to the Wall Street Journal, and I'm sure you would have written wonderful stories there, but you were probably not going to be on the 5-person team covering the biggest news story, right?
Totally.
So tell me about like how you've seen your skills develop in, you know, what has been a very short time in professional journalism.
Yeah.
And how that has changed, if at all, you know, how you think about your career.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right that
Thank you. That was the goal.
You're right. That the smaller the paper, the smaller the staff, the more opportunities you'll have just because there are fewer fish in the pond. But I also think that with the smaller, closer knit, sort of like almost like a newsroom family, and that's really what it feels like, there's a lot of opportunities for mentorship if you seek them out. A lot of people might say there's not opportunities for mentorship, and that's because they're not seeking them out. People aren't going to come to you and say, I want to mentor you, but if you have a question or if you admire somebody's work or if you want to talk about a story, you can do that. People are very open to that and they want to help you grow. And they see me, at least, I feel like an equal. I feel respected in my workplace. I don't feel like I'm a baby in the newsroom, although and when my age is brought up in the newsroom, it's someone being like, wow, look how amazing it is that you're doing all of this work so young. So I feel like that is definitely unique to local news or smaller regional or hyper-local publications. And I think in terms of my skill set developing, I think it's absolutely accelerated me because I wouldn't be getting this experience at a different place. I mean, it's possible that a national publication might have sent a younger person to Minneapolis for a day or two to check in on the temperature of the situation, whatever. But to be extensively following the hottest news story in the country / world, I was interviewed by BBC. People outside of the United States were reaching out to me to talk about what was going on in Minneapolis. And that's something that I don't think that I would have been involved in if I was at the Times. I'm sure that would have been none of my business, frankly. And the Times has a great Minneapolis correspondent, but again, that would have been none of my business. And I don't know, I think totally go local. I'm super happy at the Star Tribune. Minneapolis is awesome. I was very afraid of the cold, and it's not that bad. Honestly, I feel like that was fear-mongering. The -20
Climate change is helping.
Totally. It's 50 degrees there right now, which is insane.
There you go.
Yeah, I think I don't know where I will be in 10 years, and that's fine. And if I'm here in 10 years, that's cool. If I'm at the Star Tribune in 10 years, that's cool. If I'm in Texas in 10 years, that's cool. As long as I'm doing work that I am proud of and that feels important or it's contributing to a conversation or it's highlighting something that other people maybe would not know about otherwise, then I'm happy. I'm content. And that is what we get into this job to do, the actual practical daily reporting and the skills that you have to exhibit on a daily basis. You can do that in Texas. You can do that in Minnesota. You can do that at the Times. You can do it wherever. I don't know. I wish I knew that when I was 18. And I guess nice to know it at 23, but yeah.
I had another question, but you summed it up so perfectly that we're going to end there.
Hey,
I just have to say, having known you since you were 17 years old, having watched you grow up in this industry and do as much as you have done in this industry in such a short time. I knew when you were 17 that you were going to do big things in this industry. But to have actually watched it happen, just fills me with joy. I am so proud of you.
Thank
and
you.
I just want you to know that. And I want you to, keep doing the thing because this industry is so much better for having you in it.
Happy to have that part on video.
So thank you for being here. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Megan Greenwell. Our producer is Amanda Dara. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, where we'd love if you like or subscribe. We'll be back in 2 weeks.